F.E.A.R is a first-person shooter developed by Monolith that was released in 2005, shortly before the 7th generation of consoles fully began. You play as a member of F.E.A.R, an operation group that specializes in supernatural threats, and your mission is to hunt down a man named Paxton Fettel, a dangerous psionic that has taken control of a super soldier army. There is little known about the main character besides him being a recent addition to the F.E.A.R group and having supernaturally fast reflexes. Your journey will lead you into several dangerous battles against elite soldiers while trying to hunt down Fettel and maybe get answers about what is going on with this creepy ass child. Presentation is up first. It's a 2005 video game and it does show its age. Facial models look off, textures look dated, and anytime you're outside, you can really see its age. But you can see your feet, which is more than I can say of some modern games. There is some repetition in the environments, as most levels take place in office spaces or warehouses. They do their best to mix it up as much as possible, and some of the later stages of the game can be visually impressive. Maybe this issue can be attributed to its age, but one major thing I wish it had were subtitles. Some characters, especially Paxton,
told me so many things,
can be hard to fully understand, and that caused me to not hear all of the dialogue. I am literally this meme. Outside of that annoyance, nothing about the presentation bothered me. I'm not a big visuals person, and F.E.A.R can still look great in other ways. Battles always end up as bloody messes with bullet holes in the walls the size of my dog, and some weapons reducing enemies to bones while others just decimate their bodies. It's brutal and impactful, with every encounter being a visual feast of carnage. I'm playing the 360 version, and I can only imagine how much better it would look if remade on modern consoles and PCs. The use of light and shadows help the interior levels look better. How it interacts with the environments and enemies is great. This is a game where the darkness is dark, like you can't see shit. But having your flashlight always on isn't an option because A, it runs out of battery, and 2, enemies can sense it so you can give away your position, which can thwart plans to ambush enemies, which is a big part of how I played. The light and shadows can help you because shadows will always have something that causes them. Really good lighting, combat feel, and the music is pretty solid as well. Overall, pretty good presentation. It holds up in the ways that it needs to. Let's get to the basics of gameplay. F.E.A.R is a first-person shooter with a 3-weapon limit, and a slow-mo called Reflex being its standout feature. There are health kits and armor defined since health does not regenerate. Levels are linear affairs with some hidden corners that may contain health or reflex boosts. You do have a melee, but I didn't use it much. Even though it is a one-hit kill on most enemies, I found it too clunky to rely on, more so on higher difficulties. There are no major additional mechanics to consider, just non-stop shooting and getting
ready for the next battle.
F.E.A.R is technically a horror FPS, but F.E.A.R is technically a horror FPS, but in terms of what it does best, gunplay is absolutely its strength, with the horror elements not being great in my opinion. Which I am fine with, because the gameplay is phenomenal. Movement feels great, enemies are enjoyable to fight against with enough variables in terms of weapons, tactics, cover options, explosives, and more that give each fight a unique outcome. The weaponry is a pretty standard array of pistols, SMGs, and rifles, with a couple of unique weapons like the particle rifle and the HV penetrator. All guns handle well, and I'm glad there's no aim down sights for most weapons, as you see in the majority of FPS games. Instead, you zoom in, which does give you a better view of the battle while still being accurate enough to hit targets far away. Most battles in this game are short to medium range encounters, which doesn't necessitate long range weapons or mechanics. I did find myself sticking to the same weapon for most of the game, with having a shotgun and an assault rifle always in my inventory, with a random weapon as my third. The slow-mo is something that can be activated at almost any time, but is not strictly necessary for completing the game. But it does serve a great purpose. First-person shooters can sometimes have players want to retreat and play defensively against foes, which is a natural response, but some games have found ways to entice players to be more aggressive in firefights. Modern Doom has its glory kills, and F.E.A.R has slow-mo. Slowing down time allows for a more aggressive playstyle as you can move forward and get to enemies quickly before they can even return fire. Getting the drop on foes allows for a quick and decisive end to most battles without losing precious resources like health and medkits. There are a lot of great opportunities to flank enemies and many tools in your arsenal to assist in it, such as proximity mines and sticky bombs. I will say that F.E.A.R doesn't encourage this style of play. Leaning out of cover and using your reflexes to get off clean shots from a distance, or rushing ahead into multiple enemies and taking them out all at once are both valid ways of playing. I found myself playing aggressively a majority of the time, but falling back on being defensive against large groups or when I had low health. Speaking of health, your HP is your most important resource. Ammo is not something I usually worried about unless it was a power weapon. F.E.A.R does allow you to carry 10 medkits at a time, but they only heal about 50 HP, and after you get a few health boosts, it takes more medkits to return back to full health. They are pretty generous with health kits, but it isn't dynamic to my knowledge, meaning if you find yourself low after several fights, you might have to be low on health and medkits for a while. This can vary the difficulty as entering a battle with 10 medkits or 0 drastically changes how you will have to play. Overall, I feel as though F.E.A.R allowed for me to mix aggressive and defensive battles without overly relying on one, along with not having encounters be outright impossible if I got into them with low health. Even on harder difficulties, I was able to keep this mix as the enemies died quickly enough that ambushes were still a viable strategy. They did something I wish more games did, which is increase enemy damage instead of enemy health. In a lot of shooters, higher difficulties just equate to enemies being bullet sponges and dealing high amounts of damage. F.E.A.R is not like that since you die fast, but enemies die fast as well. Every battle becomes high stakes and highly engaging. Oddly, because of how difficulty was balanced, I found myself on average having more health kits on my extreme playthrough than on my hard one, because if I got shot, I just fucking died. It was still really fun playing on extreme though. It allowed for me to push my ambush game to its limit and abuse the slow-mo. An issue I have with the combat is how they set up enemy encounters. F.E.A.R does have a decent variety of enemies, but doesn't use them well. Every encounter focuses on one or two enemy types. The reason this sucks is every encounter becomes that type of encounter and you quickly learn how best to deal with them. These invisible enemies are great at closing the distance for rapid strikes, but since you only fight them and them alone, they don't become as dangerous as they could be. You are allowed to have them come to you and attack without any outside threat, and since these enemies are close range, a shotgun works wonders on them. That is just one example, but each enemy is like that. It's always you're fighting against soldiers, or ghosts, or assassins, or drones, or turrets, or whatever. It's never multiple types at once. The most they do is add an armored enemy to tag along with soldiers. Variations in level geometry, along with the AI being capable of creating diverse encounters from run to run, allow combat to be enjoyable. My point is, I don't think the devs tapped into the full potential of this combat system by limiting the enemy variety as they did. Speaking of AI, F.E.A.R's artificial intelligence is what most people think about when they talk about F.E.A.R. I do think they make for great fights with how they can interact with the environment by knocking over shelves to create cover for them, but what they do the best is callouts. They notice your flashlight and will call it out. Flashlight! They say your position, they ask for backup or to flank. These callouts make it easy to know what they are thinking. Others have gone into greater detail about the AI, so I'll link some videos in the description if you're curious for more. The AI does what it's supposed to do, create interesting encounters. I can easily see why people think this is the best AI ever because of the things I've discussed, and since they do have a few solid scripted ambushes, these moments combine to create a legendary status around the AI. There are a few things I wish they were programmed to do more of though. You are shown very clearly an enemy setting up a mine, and I originally thought this would mean that enemies are going to start creating traps like these in future areas, but they don't. There are a couple of scripted times they do, but I was hoping for more dynamic occasions to give the player more to be aware of. Overall, I got to give it to the devs. They did a great job with the AI. I just believe they could have used work using the full variety on offer. None of my criticisms will take away from the fact that the combat in F.E.A.R is among some of the best I have ever experienced, and I do not say that lightly. So that's the FPS part. Now let's get into the horror part. Horror as a genre is very difficult to get right, just across the board. I've watched many horror movies and shows, and played many horror games, with them producing some of my favorite media over the years. With them also producing some absolute dog shit that has been the worst experiences I've ever had. Horror games have a unique challenge with more variables than other forms of media that affects how the player can feel. From the intensity and complexity of its combat to how it deals with death, its camera, and even the act of saving all impact how the player will feel. Horror games have an enormous uphill battle to overcome, but that's a topic for another video. Comment below if you're interested in me covering that in more detail. Alright, not gonna sugarcoat this, because diabetes runs in my family, but F.E.A.R does not succeed as a horror title. In most games, the monster, creature, zombie, etc., they are the threat. They jump out at you, and when a jump scare occurs, you think, oh fuck, I have to either run or kill this thing. A good jump scare leads into future action, or at least results in a devastating outcome. The jump scares in F.E.A.R don't do anything to you. There is no threat, there is no danger, so there is no reason to be scared by any of the times when they try to scare you. The few things that do try to kill you during horror scenes are the ghosts, which die in one hit. I lied earlier, most levels are battle, occasionally a spooky thing might happen, and then you.
Get ready for the next battle!
The horror sections are breaks in the action more than anything else. Horror isn't just jump scares, it's atmosphere, it's emotion, where it's paranoia or dread. It's not just a quick boo every few minutes. They also don't feel subtle. Some horror sections have these obvious distortions you walk into that trigger them, so it's like a hallucination you know you're about to have. The ambient music tracks are really good, but they don't build off that with interesting horror elements. The way the enemy encounters are laid out also hurts the horror aspect. The assassins are great enemies that can jump scare you, but once you see one, you know that's the only enemy type you'll encounter for the moment, and the ghosts are too weak to feel threatening. What extra sucks about the ghosts is that's the main enemies you'll be fighting in the last mission. I know I'm not the only person that doesn't find F.E.A.R to be scary, but I might be the only one that finds it funny. From the weird looking frames before the hallucination completes, to the fact that the tech guy has a calling card. Anytime you see cheesy puffs, you know you're about to run into them, and I find that so funny. I'm not laughing at this fictional character for being overweight, I am laughing at the devs who felt the need to give the overweight guy a calling card of cheesy puffs. And then there's the elevator section, which goes from high intensity firefights.
What are you doing? Come on!
To elevator music and back.
Here we go again.
I fucking laughed so hard the first time I played it because the contrast between them was straight action comedy perfection. Also, this section here, like, what was the desired outcome for players? To go ah and then ah again 2 seconds later? Why? Why do this? On most of my playthroughs, I honestly ignored or fucked with the jump scares as much as I could because I knew nothing was going to come from it. And I'm a dick. There's also the mission when the enemies decide, fuck it, let's try running them over. Shooting them didn't work, so let's try to run them over like 3 or 4 times, which is hilarious and even funnier that I died to this. I'm sorry, my brain is weird, moving on. Back to being positive. F.E.A.R is a phenomenal FPS and one of the all-time greats in the genre. If you never played it, absolutely go out and do so. If you have a 360 copy, it's backwards compatible on modern Xboxes. The encounters in this game are among some of the best you can experience, and even after multiple playthroughs, it remains enjoyable. I did 4 entire playthroughs for the purpose of this video, and each one was a blast. After nearly 2 decades, F.E.A.R remains one of the best the genre has to offer. Graphics might be better, but very few FPSs can offer what F.E.A.R does. I wish this game could get a remake or remaster to hopefully allow a new batch of fans to experience this title. I know so many others have covered this game already, but I hope my review still provided some entertainment for you all, and maybe convince some of you to play it again, or for the first time. That's all for me. Please like and subscribe and be notified of my next video, where I answer the question, do aliens have nipples? Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back soon. Goodbye.